Hello everyone, welcome to X channel. I feel that in light of recent events, the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent protests that have been happening around the world, it's time to talk about a more serious topic on the channel, and that is white privilege does exist in Japan. So I am not an expert on what it's like to be a black person in Japan, obviously. So I will link to some other channels and websites in the description below, so please check those out. For me, I'm just going to share my experiences and what I've found to be the case in my own observations. One of Minneapolis's favorite sons, Prince, wrote these lyrics at the end of his song, Style. Style is when all black men are free. What I take that to mean is all around the world. And what we are seeing right now is happening all around the world. There have been demonstrations in Japan, a country not really well known for having demonstrations. So it really has become a phenomenon happening in multiple societies everywhere. And that's because it needs to. When I talk about white privilege in Japan, this is about my own recognition of it, my own experiences, where I've seen it, what I've seen, and what I've also heard other people tell me. And first off, I want to start by admitting that I didn't really understand what white privilege meant when I first heard the term. I'd been living here a number of years before it became kind of a normal term that you would hear in the media and people using regularly. And when I first heard it, I had a very negative reaction to it. It was the typical negative reaction to it that people still have now, and I would like to do my part to try to clear up that the problem is really in how we're thinking about it, not in whether it exists or not. So my first interpretation of it was, okay, I've got white skin, so that has given me some bonuses somehow along the way. It was kind of insulting to think of at first, but that's not what white privilege is, though. That's the problem. If people are thinking of it that way, that's not what it is. It's not like the famous Saturday Night Live sketch where Eddie Murphy is white for a day and white people are drinking champagne on the buses and the banks are handing out free money to white people. That's not what white privilege is. What it is, it's the common everyday occurrences that we take for granted as white people. Things that are atarimae, as they say in Japanese. It's just a matter of course. That we don't realize aren't extended to minority populations in the same way. So I want to share with you a story of something that happened to me that made me realize what white privilege actually is, and that yes, I do have it. So, I have a child, and I wanted my child to have official US citizenship, so I filled out paperwork to take to the US Embassy in Tokyo, and this was so my child could get social security number and an official US passport and everything else. So I was all ready to go, or so I thought. 2 days before I went to the embassy, I called my friend June. June is Asian American, and he had just gone through the exact process about a week before. So I wanted to ask him how it went and what happened exactly. And he brought up something that I hadn't paid attention to. He said, Paul, you need to make sure you take along your college transcript or some bills that you've gotten for utilities or something to further show evidence that you are indeed a US citizen. And I thought, a passport isn't enough? And June said, no, it's actually in the fine print that you should provide these things if necessary. And I thought, okay. Bit of a panic, like I have my college transcripts because I was job hunting around that time, so I needed my transcripts to job hunt, but utility bills, well, I happen to have a bank statement that was from my US bank and happened to have it in Japan, so I put that in the file of paperwork and went off to the embassy the next day. So I arrive at the embassy and I hand in the primary paperwork, and then I have about a 5-minute chat with the official there at the embassy, and she said, okay, you're all set. The passport should arrive in 3 to 6 months. Do you have any questions? And I said, well, how about this extra information I brought, like my transcripts and this bank statement I've got? And she says, oh no, that's not necessary. 5 minutes of talking to you, I can tell that you're American. So that was the first time it hit me. And part of that was the realization that if I hadn't talked to June, I would have taken it for granted that, oh, they don't really need that extra information to prove I'm a citizen. If I hadn't talked to my Asian American friend, I would have thought just that. But what really drove it home for me was I was chatting with another Asian American friend who was living in Tokyo at the time. We were mutual acquaintances with June, and I was telling him, look, should I tell June about my experience at the embassy? Do you think he'd be upset because he was treated differently? My other Asian American friend said, go ahead and tell him, he won't be upset. And I asked, well, why not? And he said, it's because it happens all the time. Since then, I've become more aware of how Asian Americans are treated in terms of asked questions like, where are you from? And when they say, I'm from Santa Monica, they get a follow-up question, which is, well, no, where are you really from? Which is totally strange for me to think about. I've never been challenged further when I've said, I'm from Wisconsin. No one's ever been like, well, where are you really from? And I have to cast myself back to, well, my ancestors came from Germany. Like, that doesn't happen. But it happens to Asian Americans, and with a fair amount of regularity, apparently. So how does this apply in the Japan context? Well, after you've lived here a while, you begin to realize that there's some general discrimination that goes against all foreigners who live here, like not getting people sitting next to you on the train. You also begin to realize, if you have friends who are not white and are also foreigners in Japan, there is a kind of hierarchy, a ladder of preferred and dispreferred foreigners. And as a white American male, I'm pretty much on the top rung of that ladder. The most famous form of discrimination that's legal in Japan is with housing. I've had this happen right in front of me, where the housing agent, when I was looking for apartments, got on the phone with apartment owners and just asked up front, do you rent to foreigners? Oh, you don't? Okay. And then the agent turns to me and says, let's try the next place. And then the next place, the agent actually goes a step further and mentions, not that I'm a foreigner, but my client is a white American. So apparently leveraging my nationality as American and the fact that I'm white to maybe up the possibility that I will have a chance to rent in this apartment. So that's one example I've seen right in front of my face. Another example is when it comes to being asked for your identification. In Japan, as a foreigner, you are legally obligated to carry an official form of identification. If you're a tourist, that's your passport. You actually should have your passport on you at all times. If you didn't know that, you know that now. If you're a resident, you have a residence card or an alien registration card. In Japanese, it's called Gaikokujin Touroku Shoumeisho, and we often shorten that to Gaijin card. And the police will stop you and ask you for your card on occasion. It's kind of a legal gray area if they're really allowed to do that, because police are only technically supposed to stop you if they believe there's a crime in progress. But apparently that gray area allows for visa violations, could be a crime in progress, so they need to check your visa status. I've been living here 15 years and I've been stopped once. And that was at 3 a.m. when I was returning home from a bar. It actually happened in my first year here. So in the subsequent 14 years, I have not been stopped and asked for my Gaijin card. Now, I know part of it is dependent on where you live. If you live in certain areas of Tokyo, you're far more likely to be stopped by the police. So that is another factor other than skin color. But skin color is absolutely a factor. If you are a black or brown person, or someone who appears to be visibly Southeast Asian, or from the Philippines, for example, you are more likely to be stopped by police. Obviously, that's another problem with that gray area, is they're stopping people based on how they look in case they're doing a visa violation. So obviously profiling, determining who's Japanese and who's not Japanese based on look. To further illustrate how this sort of ladder of preferred and dispreferred foreigners works, again, my friend who is a mutual acquaintance of June and I, who lived in Tokyo, he quickly learned that when he was introducing himself to people, to say that he was from the United States. Basically, it became part of his initial introduction. Hi, I'm blah blah blah, and I'm from the US. And he did that because it would immediately bump him up in the esteem of Japanese people he was meeting, because there's a definite difference if they think you're from the United States or if they think you've come from Southeast Asia, somewhere like Vietnam or Thailand or the Philippines. So as I came to recognize and understand my white privilege, I could see how I was treated differently in society, whether it's in getting housing or regular daily interactions with Japanese people, possibly even for employment, because it's still the norm in Japan to put a picture of yourself onto your resume or CV. And I have little doubt that that has led to discrimination based on how you look or what race you are. So let's just be honest. White privilege is an issue that is happening in societies all around the world. That's why protests are happening all around the world. And Japan is not exempt from this. So we have to get past the idea that white privilege is somehow giving us some kind of bonus, which if you were poor, white, you've had lots of obstacles in your life going forward, you're going to say, to hell with that, I don't have any bonuses, I'm still poor and I'm still downtrodden. But that's not it. White privilege are the courtesies, things that go forth in society, like not having your citizenship questioned, that white people can take for granted, and therefore not notice that other people might receive different treatment. That's why white privilege is so insidious, is because it happens and white people can deny it because they don't see it. But you don't see it because you just have it happen and you take it for granted. It's the things we take for granted in our daily life, in our interactions, in our transactions, that minority peoples in the US and other countries in the world can't take for granted. So we all need to work together to recognize this and work together to eliminate these problems, these privileges. And it's not about eliminating the privileges, it's about extending that privilege to everyone. That's the other miscomprehension, that white people, well, we have to give up these privileges. No. Just don't privilege. Make it equal across the board in terms of how we treat each other, institutionally and interpersonally. And this is something we can all work towards for both of those things. We need to do it. These demonstrations around the world are a cry for change, and we need to heed that cry and make it happen. Thank you very much for watching this episode of my channel. Please look for my other content weekly, and I'll catch you on the next one.